"Get out and don't ever come back," my parents said. So I left without a word. 3 months later, Dad texted, "Why haven't you paid the mortgage?" I replied, "I thought I wasn't welcome." Then my phone exploded. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I just stood there in the doorway, a paper bag full of groceries I'd bought yet again, and listened as my mother called me ungrateful. Her name is Isabel Martinez. She has this sharp way of speaking even when she's calm, but that day, she wasn't. "You're ungrateful," she said, her voice rising above the dull hum of the refrigerator. "Get out and don't bother coming back." My father, Fernando Martinez, stood a few steps behind her, leaning on the kitchen counter. He didn't say anything. He didn't even look at me. He just rubbed the bridge of his nose like the conversation was giving him a headache. And Javier, my younger brother by 3 years, didn't even look up from the couch. He was still in his pajamas at 3 p.m., phone in hand, acting like none of this had anything to do with him. It was Sunday. I'd come straight from work. The bag was heavy. Bread, eggs, milk, the staples they always forgot to buy. I brought them every week, silently, like a ritual. Nobody noticed, but everyone expected it. I looked at the living room one last time, the same carpet I'd been vacuuming since I was a teenager. The same dent in the wall from when Javier broke the picture frame and blamed the wind. And I remember thinking, is this what it takes for them to finally stop needing me? So I left. Nobody stopped me, not even my father, not even the boy I once called my little brother. I moved out at 18. Not because I hated my home, at least not then, but because I knew I wouldn't survive if I stayed. My parents loved to say they raised me well, but what they really meant was that I raised myself, quietly, so they wouldn't have to. We weren't poor, not exactly, but there was always this feeling of being on the edge. Bills arrived late. Food was scarce at the end of the month. The lights flickered, sometimes not from a storm, but because nobody had paid the bill yet. I got my first job at a roadside diner after 10th grade. First as a hostess, then as a busser when they were short-staffed, and finally as a waitress, even though I wasn't legally old enough to serve alcohol. Nobody asked. Nobody cared. My mother didn't drive me, my father didn't pick me up at night, but they sure sighed loudly when I stashed my tips in a jar labeled college. Senior year, I did homework at 2 a.m. between double shifts. Still, I graduated with honors. I got a full scholarship to a state university. Nobody from my family came to orientation or move-in day. I rented a moving van and went by myself. That was the pattern. I took care of everything, and they let me. Javier was different, always had been. He was the baby. Their words, not mine. As a kid, he had mild asthma, but it was exaggerated. Every scrape was a crisis. Every failing grade was the school's fault, the teacher's fault, or some learning disability that was never confirmed. He dropped out of vocational school twice, quit 4 jobs in a single year. He came home at 25 to regroup, and he just stayed. And yet, they never stopped calling him special. They told their friends he was finding his way, that some people take longer. Nobody ever asked what I was figuring out. I was too busy paying the bills that nobody else seemed to notice. The first time my mother mentioned the mortgage, she didn't use the word help. She said, "Sarah, your father and I are a little short this month, just a little tight." That was 2 years ago. At first, I made a few transfers, a few hundred for groceries, gas, some utilities. Then came the water bill, then the electric, then the mortgage. The numbers grew. The thank yous dwindled. I don't even remember when I started paying it entirely. There was never a conversation, just silence on their part and a reminder on my calendar on mine. Javier once joked that I'd become the family's safety net. I laughed, but the laugh caught in my throat because deep down I knew I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was a monthly transfer. And still, when I walked back through that door with the groceries last Sunday, they looked at me like I was being selfish, like I was taking something from them, not giving it. It's strange, isn't it? How you can give so much for so long that people forget it ever came from you. My new apartment wasn't much. One bedroom, thin walls, a stove that creaked like it had opinions, but it was mine. I painted the kitchen cabinets a soft blue. I put a plant in the window, and most days I remembered to water it. There were no shouts, no passive-aggressive sighs, no unpaid bills sliding under the door like threats. Just silence. For the first time in years, I could breathe. Not that shallow breathing you do when you're waiting for someone to need something. No. Real breathing, full, deep, long, the kind that has nothing hanging over you. I slept. I cooked just for myself. I watched bad TV and left the dishes in the sink. On purpose. And you know what? Nobody said a word. Not a call, not a voicemail, not even a text from Javier, which in itself was a relief. My phone was silent, and that silence tasted like freedom. I didn't expect praise, but I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would ask if I was okay. They didn't. And then, 3 months later, on a Tuesday I barely remember, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my father. Just one line, "Why haven't you sent the mortgage this month?" I stared at the screen for a long time. I wasn't angry, not surprised, just empty, like someone had knocked on a door I'd locked for a reason. And all I thought was, of course, it was never about me, it was always about the house. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I set the phone face down on the table, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat in silence. No music, no TV, just that single message vibrating in the background like a mosquito I refused to swat. An hour passed, then another. When I finally checked the phone again, there were 5 new messages. 3 from my mother, 1 from Javier, and another from Fernando. "Sarah, the bank called. We're behind. How could you do this to us? You know we don't have that money." Javier's message was the most predictable. "Are you really going to let them lose the house just to prove a point?" There it was, the timely guilt, as always. None of them asked how I was doing. None of them said, "We miss you." None of them mentioned that, in those very words, they had told me, "Don't bother coming back." They didn't want me. They wanted my help. And there's a difference. It felt like cold air seeping under the door of a house that used to be warm. I let another hour pass, and then I replied to my father's original message. Just one line. I thought I wasn't welcome anymore. I put the phone back down on the table, and then the deluge began. Going, gone. Calls, texts, voicemails, like a dam had burst. Suddenly, my absence was unacceptable. Suddenly, I mattered again, but not as a daughter. Not as the one who always took responsibility and the only one who was now refusing to continue doing so. They didn't stop that night. I turned off notifications, but the phone kept lighting up every few seconds like the world was ending and only I could stop it. "Sarah, answer your father. He's sick with worry. We raised you better than this. You're acting out of spite." Spite. That word stung more than it should have. Not sacrifice. Not support. Not a decade of silent giving. Spite. As if I'd withheld something that was rightfully theirs. At midnight, Javier called. I let it ring. Then came the voicemail. "Sarah, come over. It's serious. They're losing it. The bank is getting involved. You have to fix this." Fix this, as if I'd broken it. As if I was the one who let everything fall apart. Not the one who held it together for years without complaint. I listened to his message twice, then deleted it. The next morning, another message from Isabel. "This is destroying the family and Fernando. What kind of daughter does this to her parents?" That one made me laugh. A dry, empty laugh that echoed in my silent kitchen. Because I could answer that question. The kind of daughter who paid your mortgage while you told friends Javier was job hunting. The one who skipped her own doctor's appointments to keep the water running in a house she didn't live in. The one you kicked out the minute she said no. But I didn't write any of that. I waited. I waited for the sun to fully rise, for the coffee to go cold, for the ringing of the phone to sound less like family and more like static. And then I replied calmly, clearly, "It's not my problem anymore." And this time, I didn't flinch when the calls started because I finally understood I wasn't being cruel. I was just done. For a while, I told myself silence was better than not knowing, easier than confirming what I already suspected. But even silence has weight. It settles in your chest in the quiet moments and whispers things you try to ignore. And eventually, that whisper turns into a question you can no longer avoid. Where did the money go? I had been sending money every month, on time, without fail, for groceries, for bills, for the mortgage. They never said thank you, but they never told me to stop either, and I never asked for receipts. Maybe that was my mistake. So, one morning, I did what I should have done months before. I called the bank. Not to confront, just to ask. A woman answered. Her voice was calm, professional, with that typical Midwestern kindness. She asked for the mortgage account number, some security information, and then put me on hold for a few moments. When she returned, her tone had shifted slightly. It appears this account has been in a delinquent status for approximately 7 months. I blinked. I'm sorry, delinquent? Yes, ma'am. Automatic payments from your account were removed. We haven't received anything from that source since then. I thanked her. Then I asked, afraid, if any payments had been made otherwise. Another pause. Then she said, there have been a few partial payments, but the account is flagged. It is currently in pre-foreclosure status. I don't remember much after I hung up. I know I stood in the middle of my kitchen, phone in hand, my heart strangely calm, not racing, just heavy. That kind of silence that comes after a betrayal, not loud, just final. I opened the banking app and started scrolling, transfer after transfer, month after month, thousands of dollars, all labeled household, utilities, or family help. But if the mortgage hadn't been paid, what had they spent it on? Where had it gone? I thought about the new armchair in the living room, the smart TV that was on sale, the groceries that suddenly seemed better stocked when I visited. I hadn't asked, I hadn't questioned, I had just given and they had taken. I don't think it was malicious. Not at first. But at some point, they stopped seeing it as help and started seeing it as their due. I didn't call them because I was angry. I called them because I was tired of assuming. And when you give someone years of silence, what you get in return isn't always the truth, but it's often clarity. I started with Javier. He answered right away, like he'd been waiting for me to call. His voice sounded rushed, already defensive, already laced with emotion. He said Mom had barely slept, that Dad had gone quiet, that the bank had called again. He told it like I'd lit a match and walked away from the family home without looking back. But none of his words touched me. Not really. Because in the midst of all that panic, there was a tone I knew too well. Guilt disguised as urgency. I waited, let him speak, and then asked, evenly, what happened to the money I send every month? Silence on the other end. Not a technical silence, an emotional one, the kind that happens when someone is desperately searching for a version of the truth that doesn't make them look worse than they already feel. He said they'd used it for groceries, for repairs, for things that came up. He said it like I was being unreasonable for asking, but I'd lived there. I knew how much the mortgage was, and I knew what 7 months of unpaid bills looked like. So I asked again, not louder, but firmer. You knew they weren't paying the mortgage, didn't you? He didn't answer directly. He didn't have to. Because if he truly hadn't known, he would have sounded surprised, upset, defensive in a different way. But instead, he sighed, that same tired, empty sigh he used when he got caught skipping class or lying about job interviews. A sigh that said, yes, and I hoped you'd never ask. I thanked him, not for kindness, but for finality. Then I hung up. That same night, the phone rang again. It was Isabel. I let it go to voicemail, but it rang again. And this time, I answered. Her voice was tight. That kind of forced calm she used when she knew she was wrong but would never admit it out loud. She said I'd embarrassed them by calling the bank, that I was making things worse, that families didn't handle their affairs this way. And for the first time in a long time, I let her talk because I wanted to hear how far she would go to avoid saying the words, "We lied to you." Finally, Fernando took the phone. His voice was lower, almost soft. He didn't ask how I was, didn't ask why I was upset. He just asked if I could help them catch up. Just this once, just until they found a solution. And in that moment, I understood with perfect clarity. They weren't sorry, they were scared. And scared people don't apologize. They bargain. So I answered without hesitation, "Sell the house." There was a beat of silence. Then two voices overlapping, incredulous. "You don't mean that. This is still your home." But it wasn't, and maybe it never had been. The next morning, I woke up to a flurry of notifications, texts, voicemails, missed calls. Some desperate, some furious, a few feigning calm. I didn't open any of them. I already knew what they would say, that I was cruel, that I had no heart, that I'd turned my back on family. But I hadn't. They had turned their backs on me the day I stopped being useful. I made a fresh cup of coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. I watched the steam spiral as the phone vibrated on the counter, like it was trembling with a guilt I refused to carry. Then I opened our old message group, the one we used for birthday planning, reminders, grocery lists I always ended up paying for. I didn't say anything, didn't make any dramatic exit. I simply changed the group name from family to account closed. I muted it, archived it, and then deleted their numbers. Not out of anger, not even sadness, but clarity. Because when someone shows you that your presence only matters in relation to what you give, the most generous thing you can do is leave. On the counter, I saw a white envelope, still sealed. My name written in Isabel's handwriting. She must have left it the day they still believed I would come back. I picked it up, considered opening it, then tossed it in the trash. No drama, no message, just paper, just letting go. And in that moment, with no one watching, no one clinging, no one calling me selfish, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness. I didn't leave because I stopped loving them. I left because they only loved the version of me that paid the bills and never asked questions. And when that version disappeared, so did their idea of family. Some people hear this and think it's cold, but there's nothing cold about protecting the parts of yourself that no one else bothered to care for. I don't need them to understand. I just need them to stop pretending they ever saw me. Because I was there, every day, every month, until I wasn't. And now they can finally feel the silence they spent years pretending wasn't mine. If you've ever stayed too long in a place that only wanted what you could give, just leave. That's all. No explanation needed. Some of us already understand.